In Southeast Asia, tensions between the Philippines and Malaysia are reaching a breaking point, casting a shadow over the region's fragile stability. Long-standing disputes, once dormant, are now re-emerging with renewed intensity, fueled by shifting political winds and growing public sentiment. The tranquil waters of the Sulu and South China Seas hide turbulent geopolitical currents, where the surface calm belies deep-seated rivalries and unresolved claims. Nationalistic rhetoric is on the rise and diplomatic ties are fraying as leaders face mounting pressure from their citizens to defend national interests. At stake is not just territory, but the stability of a region vital to global trade and security. These waters are lifelines for billions of dollars in commerce, making peace here a matter of international concern. A single miscalculation could ignite a conflict with far-reaching consequences, threatening decades of ASEAN peace and the prosperity that has come with it. The dispute over Sabah, rooted in colonial-era agreements and the legacy of the Sultanate of Sulu, is resurfacing, stirring old wounds and nationalist fervor on both sides. Overlapping maritime claims in the South China Sea add a modern flashpoint, as new discoveries of resources and strategic interests intensify the competition. Both nations face the assertive presence of China, whose growing military and economic influence complicates any unified response and raises the stakes for all involved. The urgency is heightened by the broader US-China rivalry, which casts a long shadow over the region and injects uncertainty into every diplomatic move. Local disputes risk becoming proxies for great power competition, threatening to escalate into a global crisis that could draw in actors far beyond Southeast Asia. This analysis will dissect the historical roots of the Sabah claim and the contemporary dynamics of the South China Sea dispute, revealing how the past and present are deeply intertwined. We'll examine the geopolitical, economic, and legal dimensions, and the role of ASEAN and external powers in shaping the region's future, as well as the challenges they face in forging consensus. Understanding these fault lines is crucial to preventing the collapse of a precarious peace, and to building a framework for lasting stability in Southeast Asia. The world is watching as the region stands on the edge, hoping that diplomacy and dialogue will prevail over division and discord. The Sabah dispute is deeply rooted in colonial history, shaped by centuries of shifting power and foreign intervention in Southeast Asia. At the heart of the issue lies the legacy of the Sultanate of Sulu, a once powerful maritime kingdom whose influence stretched across the Sulu Sea. In the 17th century, the Sultan of Brunei ceded Sabah to the Sultan of Sulu as a reward for military assistance, forming the historical basis of the Philippine claim to the territory. Decades later, in 1878, the Sultan of Sulu signed an ambiguous agreement with British representatives, interpreted by the Philippines as a lease, and by Malaysia as a cession of territory. This single document would become the focal point of decades of diplomatic tension. The linguistic ambiguity of the 1878 agreement has fueled a century-long legal quagmire, with both sides presenting historical documents to support their claims. When Malaysia was formed in 1963, the Philippines protested, arguing that the United Kingdom had no right to transfer sovereignty over Sabah without the consent of the Sulu heirs, or the Philippine government. Annual payments from Malaysia to the Sultan's heirs are seen by Manila as proof of a continuing lease, while Kuala Lumpur insists they are merely cession payments, finalizing the transfer of sovereignty. For the Philippines, the Sabah claim is about justice, national pride, and reclaiming a lost legacy that is deeply embedded in the country's historical consciousness. For Malaysia, Sabah is an inseparable part of its federation, home to millions of Malaysians and a vital region for the nation's unity and development. The historical narrative remains a powerful political tool, invoked by leaders to rally public support and justify each nation's stance on the international stage. The echoes of colonial-era deals and diplomatic maneuvering continue to divide two ASEAN founding members, complicating regional cooperation. The dispute's legacy shapes national identity, influences foreign policy, and stirs emotions in both countries to this day, ensuring that the question of Sabah remains unresolved and deeply significant. The Sabah dispute simmered for decades, but recent years have seen it reignite. The 2013 Lahad Datu standoff, where armed followers of a Sulu claimant landed in Sabah, brought the issue back into the spotlight. Malaysia responded by bolstering its military presence and halting annual payments to the Sultan's heirs. In the Philippines, nationalist sentiment surged, with calls for a more assertive pursuit of the claim. Diplomatic spats have intensified, with both sides issuing protests and summoning ambassadors. A 2022 French arbitration court ruling ordering Malaysia to pay billions to the Sultan's heirs added a new legal dimension. Malaysia contests the ruling, but the legal battle has further entangled the two nations. The Sabah claim is now a high-stakes political, legal, and diplomatic conflict. The ghost of the dispute remains very much alive. Beyond Sabah, the South China Sea is a modern flashpoint for both nations. The Philippines and Malaysia have overlapping claims in the Spratly Islands, based on UNCLOS, and both face China's expansive 9-dash line. Manila has adopted a confrontational, legalistic approach, publicizing Chinese incursions and building alliances. Malaysia prefers quiet diplomacy, balancing economic ties with China and avoiding public confrontations. This divergence strains regional solidarity and complicates efforts to form a united ASEAN front. Increased patrols have led to tense encounters, not just with China, but between Philippine and Malaysian vessels. Overlapping exclusive economic zones mean that asserting sovereignty can inadvertently challenge each other's claims. The South China Sea has become a parallel arena of conflict, compounding historical baggage with immediate maritime challenges. A single misstep could escalate tensions dramatically. The Philippines and Malaysia are caught in a web of national interests and great power rivalry. Manila's renewed assertiveness is backed by a pivot to the US, emboldening its stance on both Sabah and the South China Sea. Malaysia, meanwhile, hedges between Washington and Beijing, seeking to avoid economic retaliation and diplomatic isolation. China exploits divisions within ASEAN, using economic leverage to weaken regional unity. The US strengthens alliances, clarifying its defense commitments to the Philippines and raising the stakes for any aggressor. This volatile environment increases the risk of miscalculation. Defensive actions by one state are seen as offensive by the other, fueling a spiral of escalation. Strategic decisions in Manila and Kuala Lumpur are now deeply enmeshed in great power competition. The bilateral relationship is no longer just about borders, it's a frontline in the Indo-Pacific rivalry. At the heart of these disputes are powerful economic drivers, shaping the destinies of entire nations and influencing the daily lives of millions. Sabah's palm oil, timber, and offshore oil and gas are not only vital to Malaysia's economy and energy security, but also provide employment and livelihoods for countless local families. The South China Sea holds vast, largely untapped reserves of oil and gas, making access to these resources a matter of national security and future prosperity for both Malaysia and the Philippines. Malaysian energy giant Petronas continues to operate in these contested waters, drawing strong protests and diplomatic pushback from Manila, further escalating tensions. Rising tensions now threaten over $10 billion in annual bilateral trade, as well as the stability of the broader ASEAN economic community, which relies on open sea lanes and cooperation. Local communities like the Bajau Laut are caught in the crossfire, as increased patrols and stricter borders disrupt traditional fishing grounds and centuries-old trade routes. The conflict has a direct human cost, turning once thriving zones of connection and commerce into zones of uncertainty, hardship, and loss. Economic competition continues to fuel the rivalry, while ongoing diplomatic hostility puts jobs, incomes, and entire ways of life at risk for ordinary people. The stakes are not just national or political, but deeply personal for those living along the maritime frontier, whose futures remain uncertain. The region's prosperity, stability, and harmony now hang in the balance, awaiting the outcome of this complex struggle. Rising tensions test ASEAN's core principles of non-interference and peaceful dispute settlement. A direct confrontation between the Philippines and Malaysia threatens to paralyze the bloc and expose its limitations. ASEAN's consensus model makes mediation nearly impossible without both parties' consent, unlikely given Malaysia's firm stance on Sabah. The bloc's inability to address this conflict erodes its credibility as a guarantor of regional peace. Divergent strategies on the South China Sea further fragment ASEAN, making it easier for external powers to divide and rule. The dream of a binding code of conduct recedes as intra-ASEAN discord grows. The bloc faces a dilemma: evolve into a genuine security community, or remain a bystander as bilateral conflicts escalate. ASEAN's relevance in Asia's security architecture is on the line. The US-China rivalry looms large over the Philippine-Malaysian dispute. The US alliance with the Philippines emboldens Manila, while Washington treads carefully on Sabah to avoid alienating Malaysia. China wields economic leverage, using trade and investment to influence both nations and discourage a united ASEAN front. Beijing's strategy exploits divisions, deepening fissures within the regional bloc. The involvement of great powers risks turning a local dispute into a proxy conflict. A naval incident could quickly draw in external patrons, escalating the crisis. Leaders in Manila and Kuala Lumpur must navigate not only their own rivalry, but also the gravitational pull of Washington and Beijing. The interests of these powers do not always align with regional peace. The stakes are higher than ever. The Philippines and Malaysia stand at a crossroads, their relationship strained by history and modern rivalry. The Sabah claim and South China Sea disputes threaten regional stability and test ASEAN's unity. Economic competition and great power involvement amplify the risks of escalation. De-escalation will require political will, dialogue, and a willingness to compartmentalize disputes. Mechanisms for peaceful resolution seem distant, but are essential for the region's future. The choices made today will have lasting consequences for Southeast Asia's peace and prosperity. The alternative to diplomacy is a dangerous path toward crisis. Can the two nations find a way to manage their conflicts, or are they destined to become Asia's next major flashpoint?